everybody, and welcome to another episode of 7th Fantasy Behind the Scenes, a talk show where the members of the design team come together to talk about the elements of the game and the story behind them. I am Eddie Price, your host, and in today's episode we're going to be delving into the mysterious realm of magic. The magic system is a brand new feature exclusive to 7th Fantasy. It introduces 36 spells bound within 6 different grimoires. But to help me decipher these tomes, I have summoned the aid of Carl Periton, Dr. Peter Wright, Isabel, Lovell, and Dan Cliff into a Zoom call. So thanks everyone for joining. So I'll just start with Carl because it seems like a no-brainer, but the magic system always was it always going to be included into the actual game when you first came across sort of Fantasy and you're like, right, Fantasy, we're going to do it? Was the magic system always going to be there, or did you think of just having it as like special effects and sort of cantrips on the profiles?
Yeah, no, it had to be right from the off.
Yeah.
When we looked at fantasy, we'd already had some things that had gone before. We've got Seventh Voyage, which had a magic system to it, and it was the same one that was then used in Otherworld Fantasy Skirmish that we wrote, and it was so integral to the genre. I'd be thrown out of the game design school, I think, if we did a fantasy game and then didn't put that in. So it was always there. The challenge was trying to find what the best fit was with the existing mechanics and balancing that with those, and then kind of across the game with the rest of the profiles. So that's where we started off. How can we fit it in? How can we maintain balance with the existing stuff and still make it fun and cinematic, which is the heart of kind of the 7TV game. So what sort of style of magic did we want? Because we're looking at films from the 60s, the 70s and 80s in there, and they didn't always have the biggest budget to do, great effects. It's Harry Potter came a little bit later, and it was thrown all over the place. But back in the day, it was maybe a bit of a shimmer and a funny voice. Is about as best we got. So how can we kind of reflect some of that as well, but still make it fun? At the end of the day, it's a tabletop skirmish game. So how do we make that work and interact and be fun for players as well was the challenge, I think.
Yeah, because I was never actually part of the designing of the sort of magic system. I kind of, I purposely took a sort of step back from it because I thought it would be quite overwhelming and sort of, difficult to sort of get into. But I know sort of over the 2 years that we did design it, it kind of went through a lot of sort of different, variations. Peter, could you sort of like tell us what the story was of the magic system? Like how many sort of versions did it have?
I think there are at least 5 versions of it. And the last version came out of the play testing. I think we started off with 3 when we first started working on the fantasy magic system. We were still working on the profiles, so I think we had 3 initial approaches. So one was sort of 7th Voyage kind of revision for 2nd edition. Then we had a kind of Children of the Fields, which was one of the program guides Crooked Dice produced a couple of years ago. So we had a combination of special effects, which were called cantrips, and a deck of sort of 20 spell cards, which worked a little bit like props or gadgets. And then we had the idea of grimoires and cantrips. So we would have 6 grimoires representing 6 kinds of magic, and then we would have sort of individual cantrips that were going to be like special effects for each profile. And it was that combination, the cantrips for individual profiles and the 6 grimoires that we went with, and that was the system that we stuck with right the way throughout the design process. But every time we revisited it, it was changed and revised and tweaked until we got the systems that we've got in the box set now. But we did that using a group of 6 students, or 6 interns that were part of the main design team, and they split off. They volunteered to do the magic system, and 2 of those were Isabel and Dan, actually, that are here with us tonight.
Yeah, so Dan, what did you do when you sort of like, would you assign like a grimoire to go and work on, or what sort of involvement did you have with the actual sort of magic system?
It was kind of split. So we all sort of discussed how we kind of wanted the magic system to work, and we kind of collaborated like on that. But then when we kind of had that down and we were going away to work on the grimoires, yeah, we each got assigned one, and we were basically tasked to make quite a few spells that would fit in that, and then we then came back together, everyone pulled their ideas, we looked at them, talked through whether they'd work or not, and then kind of finalised them. But yeah, it was like one person per book, but then things kind of got shifted around when we started talking about them as a team.
So, what did you do, Isabel? Like, what? Sorry, Carl, was you saying something then?
We had some great submissions from that early piece of work from the team in there. There were, once we'd crunched and got the spells kind of balanced for what we had, we ended up with a couple of kind of difficult spells, a couple of mid-range ones, and an easy one. There was 6 in each book. But it's probably worth mentioning John, who was part of the team. He produced loads for his book, which I think was maybe Book of the Dead. Peter, am I right in saying? Yeah. And they were so great that we actually kind of harvested those off and repurposed them for a load of special effects and star qualities later on. Because that's essentially what spells are. They're an extra kind of quite powerful ability that a small group of profiles have got through the kind of gateway magic user special effect. So yeah, we could repurpose loads, and there was brilliant work. And all of those spells kind of survived right the way through into the final draft. We tweaked them a little bit for balance along the way, but they were that great that they didn't really change, even though the mechanics around it did to get them to. That was a really kind of solid piece of work.
Yeah, because I think there was, from what my understanding of it was there was originally kind of like a level of spell. There was like one really strong one, 2 kind of medium level spells, and then one sort of lesser spell. Was that right, Isabel? Did you sort of like have these sort of like multiples, like 3 spells per book that went to 6 spells, or sort of how did that work?
It kind of did start off as the 3 spells, but we wanted the grimoires to be, worth the paper that they were going to be printed on. So it did become 6 spells, and then we kind of had, the one massive spell that was kind of the powerhouse. Then we kind of designed it so that we had 2 offensive spells, 2 defensive spells, and one that was kind of like a buff for your side, basically. So that's kind of how that evolved.
And what sort of grimoire did you end up sort of working on?
My grimoire was the Tome of Shades and Shadows, so I got all of the illusionary and misdirection kind of spells, which were really fun, but there were a couple that were a bit of a nightmare. So
I wasn't really part of that decision. Kind of when you start to group them and theme them to start off with, we ended up with was it 9, and then we crunched it down to 6. Peter, was that right?
Yeah, we started off with we knew we wanted 6 grimoires, so we decided to do 9. I don't know why, and then we cut them down to 6 again. But I think that the biggest trouble we had, the spells were comparatively easy to design, and then it was a whole series of tweaks. But naming the actual grimoires took, it took about 3 months for us all to agree on what we should call them.
There was a strain of Latin for a while, wasn't there? Where they were all Latin names.
That was my bad idea, yeah. So it's good to get rid of that. And then I think we ended up, because we're quite democratic, we came down to voting on 2 of them. And I think the demonic one was one we voted on. And was it the kind of healing one that took us ages to decide on what we were going to call that?
it was the Druidic doctrine, I seem to remember. That's
Declaration wins again.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have the 6 grimoires here, so I'm just going to name them actually. So we've got the Conjurer's Codex, which I love, and I think that was always kind of the. I don't know if that was discussed. I feel like that's one that I do remember, and the Druidic Doctrine. Then we've also got the Book of Life, the Infernal Folio, the Tomes of Shades and Shadows, like Isabel said, and then the Scrolls of the Dead. So I'll go through sort of each of you. Which one of those are you sort of most excited to kind of play? Just based on how what they can actually do. So I'll start with you, Carl. Which one?
I don't know. I did Scrolls of the Dead immediately. I kind of go through. I think there was a lot of mixing and matching about what went in where at one point, and I think we were trying to get Scrolls of the Dead was clearly kind of necromancy, but there was the Book of Life as well, which was meant to be a slightly more positive version of that. So I think some of the spells we kind of mixed and matched between for a while. But yeah, Scrolls of the Dead, I'd probably go with that.
Isabel, what would you say your favourite one was?
Not to be a narcissist, but I'm kind of excited to see Tomes of Shades and Shadows, just because, writing it's one thing, but seeing how it's actually going to work on a tabletop, because obviously we didn't get to playtest the grimoires ourselves because of COVID, so I still don't really know how my spells work that I wrote, so I'm excited to see how they work.
Dan, which one would you say your favourite one was?
So I did the Book of Life was mine, but I'm going to betray it and say that I think the Conjurer's Codex is my favourite because, I don't know, there's something very classic about that kind of elemental magic, like in every fantasy thing. You can throw fireballs, you can make a big earth wall, you can summon elementals. That's just fun. And I think that one, the spells in there have a lot of impact on the tabletop and will kind of change how things play out. And I think that's makes it kind of the most exciting to want to play with in an actual game.
Yeah, so it seems like the most sort of unique in that sense.
Yeah.
And Peter, which one would you say you're most excited to play around with?
Probably the Infernal Folio, because I've been working with Carl for so long now. I just like setting things on fire. So I think that there's a whole range of great spells in the Infernal Folio that are genuinely sort of demonic and devilish and fiery. So there should be a lot of fun on the battlefield, really.
I'm just quite looking forward to just seeing them because I don't have samples. But one of the quite cute things that we've done with this one is that they're all kind of little kind of half-postcard-sized little books. So you'll get to. We wanted to make the housekeeping of it, easy so that you can kind of see in front of you. So I'm going to hold something up, which is we might be able to get some screenshots of it, I'm sure, later on. That's not happening at all, is it? No, the background's killing it. We'll have to cut that. But we'll prop up some graphics, I'm sure, of that. But each one's its own little tone, which is I'm quite looking forward to.
Yeah, I do have to say, when I've seen the sort of the final drafts and the design work and the actual sort of artistic work on these sort of grimoires, they look amazing.
That's Dave Needham again. He's on my background here, and he's done all of the artwork for that, and he's fantastic. Yeah, it's throughout the entire box.
Yeah,
but each book has got its own little kind of sigil.
Yeah. So, what did the playtesters make of it then? So when we got to this point where you've kind of got like the basic rough guide of the system, and you sort of said to the playtesters, right, have a get your lips around that. What did they sort of feel about it?
They liked it. They definitely thought it was, it needed to be there, and they liked the mix of the spells and then the kind of the lower level stuff that we gave to people. There's 27 magic users that have got access to the spells books out of 230 profiles. I think it's just over 10% or so. But the main feedback, and this came from two long-term players that had actually played Otherworld and Seventh Voyage. It was the layering that was the issue. Really, it was the mechanic. They said, I've got a choice of lots of different spell books because we wanted to give them choice and have that kind of richness to it. But there was a little bit too much to remember. I've got that book there and that spell there, and they had a much larger number of spells to pick from in those initial drafts. And it was the housekeeping of it that they really fed back on. And also the difficulty of casting the spells. It was mechanics that we originally had in there meant that it was just the kind of success curve was just a little bit too high, I think, and easy to do with the way that some of the dice mechanics stacked together.
Was that when we had the magic points then, or the magic plot points? So did they get to try that?
I think they got dropped out early on because we tried lots of different systems, and working through it, we kind of realised, well, we've got plot points and we've got magic points, and there's two systems in there, and it just ended up being a little bit too much, an extra level or an extra set of housekeeping that people had to remember. So we first of all looked at the access that people had to some of the spells and drew that back, and the difficulty, and what we ended up with was probably more similar to first edition's magic system in the kind of the base mechanic that it had, but we introduced some nice things where there are different statistics that you add to the dice roll, so it could be both kind of mind or spirit. So that got introduced, and then we had a couple of goes at just making the difficulty levels kind of right. So each spell has got a difficulty number to be able to cast it effectively, and that took a couple of tweaks to really find out. It's the dull kind of number crunching part of kind of game design in there. Is where's that baseline, that middle line that you need to work from.
Yeah, so like the balance
of
it. So what, like, going to you, Peter, what would you say like the sort of the biggest sort of challenges were of like sort of creating this magic system?
The spells were a dream to do, and the team that worked on the grimoires were just fantastic. Actually, all the spells, as I said, the ideas for the spells were great, and the refinement was really easy. I think the hardest thing was realizing that simple is better. I think we really started with a simple idea for a magic system, and then it got really complicated really quickly with magic points and sort of winds of sorcery blowing across the battlefield, and then magic points being generated in the same way that plot points were generated. And we got closer and closer to it feeling like a role-playing game, but not feeling like 7TV. So a lot of the sort of second half of the development was scaling all of that back and going, okay, what don't we need? I think that's probably the essence to games design in some way. You start off really complicated and then just decide what you don't need and take it all out again. Not necessarily the most economic way of spending your time, but it was a really kind of interesting experience for anybody who was kind of relatively new to games design to go, hang on, complex isn't necessarily best. And as we refined it, we just got simpler and simpler, just to try and capture the kind of energy and free-flowing nature of 7TV itself. It is a fast, quick, fun game, and you didn't want this really monolithic magic system where you had to calculate, how many magic points you were getting when the wind blew from the west or whatever it was. I don't think we ever got to that stage. But it was difficult. So for us, the challenge I think was how do we keep it simple? How do we keep it fun? And most of all, how do we keep it in keeping with 7TV?
Yeah. And so Dan, what do you think in terms of like the creative freedom that you had, especially at the start of it? Everyone kind of seems like they had a lot of ideas, and like Peter said, you have to kind of scale it back. But what was the sort of the difference between the magic side of things and then going to design sort of like say like a profile or like an artifact?
I think one of the biggest things, which I think was kind of a good thing in some ways and possibly kind of a big detriment in another, is that it felt, at least to me, kind of isolated. Like all the rest of the stuff, the profiles and the artifacts and all those things were all in the main meetings. Everyone's working on those. And then we have this team that are doing a separate thing. And that was kind of nice to be like, okay, we've got all these new ideas, the unique ideas that kind of only be done with the magic system. But I think we were kind of thinking almost, this is the magic system, this is its thing. And we made it in a way like, yeah, this makes sense. We've got magic points and all this, and kind of didn't quite like grasp that it was going to be overlaid on top of a game of 7TV, and that made it pretty complicated, and to the point where it was just too much, even for players who played a lot. It was just way too much. And I think the freedom to sort of create all this stuff kind of in isolation from everything else was good, because it allowed us to kind of come up with these ideas that we couldn't use anywhere else. But it did mean that we kind of went too big and made this sort of very complicated system. Like, this makes perfect sense outside of the context of a game of 7TV, because we weren't testing it in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Isabel, what are your thoughts? Did you find it like the same in terms of like the creative freedom and scaling it back and then?
Yeah, I think in a way we needed to make it as big as we did initially to get to the point that we got. Because I think if we'd have started off, I don't know, I guess we just started off simple, we might not have kind of hit all of the ideas that we did on our way down, as it were. Because, the initial like spell ideas were there from the start. But even within that, some of the mechanics surrounding how they were going to work within the game kind of had to be altered within like the individual spells, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just because they were too vastly complicated to put on a table. So in some respects, we did create a bit of a monster, but it became a smaller, nicer, more manageable monster in the end.
Do you think it sort of helped with, the actual 7TV game apart from Magic? Do you reckon working on Magic as well as, everything else sort of helped with your knowledge of the game as well and made you sort of think a bit more, how will this actually look on the table?
Oh, definitely. I think because up to that point we'd just been designing profile cards and Magic was kind of for me particularly, it was kind of the first look into the other mechanics of things that work in the game. So it's, when you're designing for a profile, you're kind of tailoring everything to that one card. So things can work specifically within that. But whereas, when you're doing Magic, you've got to think of the kind of the table more as a whole. So it really did, I really did have to sit down and think, especially in the early stages, about, the way that models would have to interact with each other when they were casting spells. Did
you have something to say, Carl? Sorry.
I was just going to say, in your defence, and it's we keep bringing this back up throughout a lot of these chats that we've been having, but it's bloody COVID came back in because you didn't get the opportunity to sit down and play test and work all of these things out in a group on a table. And I think we may have ended up getting to exactly the same point because as the playtesters did. Oh no, there's just too many layers. But without that opportunity, it's my greatest regret about this 2 years is that we haven't been able to get together and thrash that out with plenty of games. But the work on the spells and on the grimoires has captured all of that tone and that fun cinematic flavour that we've got. So that's great. It's just the lack of opportunity to test the game and work some of the bugs out, really. But I don't think anyone should be beating themselves up about that.
Yeah.
Circumstances.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add on that, Peter?
I was just going to say, I think the playtesters who could play testing amongst families and things who actually live together and stuff were invaluable, and their contribution shouldn't be overlooked as well. They were great and really appreciated.
Yeah, because I remember like when obviously this was before COVID, when it first started, we set up them sort of sessions where we could sort of get together at the university and learn how to play pulp before, or sort of at the start of the process. And, I found that really useful to sort of learn how to play it. And then, because you can't obviously design a game without knowing how to play it. So I think sort of everyone, who took it seriously, obviously learned how to play the game. And I think me, Dan and Isabel, we actually got together sort of privately and played a game as well of pulp, where I think them two are shaking their heads because, I won, but, it was just, it was just skill that did it, I think.
Skill, that's the one. Yeah.
I remember Isabel wiping the floor with another member of the team early on, I think. Or did another member of the team wipe the floor with you?
I've never won a game of pulp. I'm so bad. Yeah, it was embarrassing.
We will have to get together when we can. Me and people were saying the other day, we'll all get together and we'll have some games and finally sit down. And you can play the Magic system then.
Yep, you can play all your favourite ones. Well, I think that's pretty much it for today's episode. I think we've kind of delved into how it all came about, the story of it. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining tonight, and thanks to all my guests as well for coming along. Hopefully we'll see you again in the next sort of chat. But for now, it's bye from me and bye from you guys as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.